Iraqi army launches a massive military offensive against ISIS militants in a bid to recapture the strategic city of Tikrit. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei warns of foreign plots aimed at provoking civil strife among Muslims. Renewed clashes in eastern Ukraine result in a number of deaths following the extension of a ceasefire between Kiev and pro-Russian separatists. And Muslims worldwide usher in the holiest month in the Islamic calendar, marking the beginning of Ramadan. Hello there, you're watching AEE TV World News and I'm Fatima Basim. The Iraqi army has launched a major offensive in the northern city of Tikrit in a bid to recapture the provincial capital of Salahuddin province from ISIS militants. Fierce clashes have erupted in Tikrit as thousands of soldiers backed by the country's air force and armoured divisions closed in on the city. According to reports, 90% of the Salahuddin province has already been freed from the extremist grip. Further to the west, Iraqi security forces are preparing to launch yet another operation against the militant-held city in Fallujah. Meanwhile, clashes between government troops and militants southwest of the capital, Baghdad, left at least 20 security personnel dead and 22 others injured. Well, the Iraqi army has received the first batch of Russian-made Sukhoi fighter planes. The development follows earlier reports that the country has purchased several used Sukhoi planes from Belarus and Russia. Iraq's Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki had earlier said that the fighter jets will turn the tide against the ISIS. Meanwhile, Iraqi drones have also had a role in the nationwide battle against militant strongholds. The Iraqi Air Force has carried out airstrikes against militant-held positions in the city of Mosul, which was captured by ISIS nearly 2 weeks ago. This as American officials confirmed that the US military is flying armed drones over Baghdad to allegedly defend American troops and diplomats in the Iraqi capital if necessary. This comes after Washington deployed 180 troops as military advisors to assist Baghdad in fending off the advance of ISIS.
The president has made no decisions about the use of kinetic force in Iraq. But it would be irresponsible for us not to be planning and preparing and thinking and to be ready in case he should make that decision.
Let's speak to our Iraq correspondent, Mustafa Al-Qattan. Mustafa, tell us about the army's preparations to enter Fallujah.
Yes, actually, the Iraqi army now in Fallujah is fighting the militants there outside the city of Fallujah and in the outskirts of the city of Fallujah. Also, there's still some confrontation in the Saklawiya city, and also there's heavy clashes occurred today near the Tufaha bridge, which the militants tried to retake the bridge from the Iraqi forces. Also, the Iraqi army today, after a long day fighting between the Iraqi army with the support of the Iraqi Air Force and the armed divisions, they managed to dislodge the militants from the city of Tikrit. And the latest report says that the Iraqi army now has the upper hand, and actually more than 80% of the city is under the control of the Iraqi army. Most of the militants in the city of Tikrit had fled to the city of Hawija in the north, and actually the Iraqi army managed to kill scores of the militants in the city of Tikrit and also in the city of Beji. Again, the people in Tikrit, despite that the Lieutenant General Qasim Abbas said that the Iraqi army will distinguish between the unarmed civilians and the militants, but the inhabitants in the city of Tikrit actually fled their homes and they were heading to the city of Kirkuk, and they were aiming to reach the Kurdistan region. But the Peshmerga forces in Kirkuk city, which are now acting as the de facto authorities in the city, prevent them from entering the city of Kirkuk. And actually the people now are suffering from lack of utilities and actually examining a tough humanitarian situation. Yes.
All right, thank you for giving us the latest in Iraq. Mustafa Al-Qattan, our Baghdad correspondent. As is the case in all conflict zones, the highest price is always paid by defenseless civilians. In the latest exodus across Iraq, thousands of the country's Christians have been forced to flee their homes amid rising fears of religious persecution by ISIS militants.
Terrorism has no religion, but it surely does have the tendency to target them. As fears mount of ISIS attacking Christians near the captured city of Mosul, thousands of alarmed residents are running for their lives. Fierce fighting between ISIS militants and Kurdish forces has left these Christians no option but to seek refuge in Kurdistan's Erbil.
We fled bombardment by artillery, mortars and tanks. They bombed the district, people from here fighting with people from there, and as a result all the houses of the people were destroyed. Therefore we took our families and fled.
We decided to leave after we heard that terrorists had entered Kirkuk, and clashes ensued between them and the Peshmerga. We were shelled by mortars, so we fled. We wouldn't have left if we were not forced to. No one likes to leave his home. Most of the refugees from predominantly Christian communities of Karakosh are calling for peace.
It was all caused by the extremists. We were caught up in the crossfire. Our only demand is peace. We have no needs but peace. The most important thing that people want is security and to live a happy life.
Yet, security under the current situation is a long shot. Militants from the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria have targeted Christian groups as well as Muslim Shias for their religious or confessional differences. In many extreme cases, ISIS executed Iraqis from various sects for their alleged infidelity. Now that ISIS is expanding across Iraq, fears are rising of what the future would hold should the extremist group come to power.
Several prominent Iraqi politicians have strongly criticized Kurdish leader Masoud Barzani's remarks that the oil-rich city of Kirkuk won't be handed over to the central government in Baghdad. Barzani's recent statement further strengthens the argument that Iraq's frontiers are being redrawn by both internal and external players.
While the focus of the world shifts to Iraq's battle against an existential threat in the form of militants belonging to the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, unseen forces appear to be pulling the strings in an effort to dismember the oil-rich country.
Indeed, we have waited for more than 10 years for the Iraqi federal government to address and solve the issue of these areas covered by Article 140, but it was of no avail. The Iraqi government forces that were in these areas have withdrawn, and they have left these areas, and it was a necessity for the Peshmerga forces to go in to provide protection, and also to prevent these areas from falling into the hands of terrorists. Now, Article 140 has been accomplished, and we are not ready to talk about that.
The leader of Iraq's Kurdish region might be gloating over the recent gains made by his Peshmerga forces, which took control of the disputed oil-rich city of Kirkuk after it was overrun by ISIS militants. But he is by no means the only one who should be claiming credit. Before violating Iraq's constitution by claiming Kirkuk without Baghdad's consent, Barzani worked closely with Ankara to construct a pipeline facilitating the export of oil via Turkey independently of Iraq's government. The destination of the first shipment of that oil perhaps best reveals who is benefiting from Iraq's disintegration.
The Kurds have de facto created their own state, which is democratic. One of the signs of democracy is the granting of equality to women.
The Kurds have found more than just a new client for oil exports with the Israeli partnership. The political cover needed for what appears to be the creation of a new Kurdish state is likely to come from the Israeli entity's closest ally, Washington. And while the Americans talk of the global threat posed by groups like ISIS, the Obama administration has been heavily reliant on extremist militants to fulfill its regional agenda. Washington has both directly and indirectly supported militants fighting the Damascus government, leading to the rise of ISIS, which has now swallowed large portions of eastern Syria and northwestern Iraq. The move undermines both governments in Baghdad and Damascus, which are closely allied with Iran and have been staunchly opposed to US and Israeli hegemony in the Middle East. For the time being, it appears that the recent move by the Kurds to carve up a bigger chunk of Iraq for themselves is only a small part of a much larger regional agenda, where men like Masoud Barzani and groups like ISIS are only pawns in a bigger chess game.
Political analyst Alberto G. Watson joins us now from our Beirut studios to discuss this issue further. Mr. Watson, will the Iraqi government challenge President Barzani's calls for Kirkuk, or do they already have too much on their plate at the moment?
Well, I think that definitely Kirkuk is actually a very, very important spot strategically, and obviously is one of the most important oil spots in the country. Barzani is taking advantage of the situation, obviously, with his ambiguous, well, not even ambiguous, kind of open way of declaring that has come, finally, the moment for self-determination and independence of Kurdistan. I see that their position is actually very clear. They want to have independence, and that will definitely benefit some nations in the surrounding, like it will be definitely Israel, the first one benefit. It will be the United States and the Saudis. I mean, this whole maneuver is already programmed with time in advance, and it started with Syria, and it just passed on now to Iraq. So I definitely believe that actually with this new offensive of Maliki's military forces, which actually they're recapturing most of the space lost. I mean, if it's in Fallujah, if it's in Tikrit, if it's in Samara, if it's in outside Mosul, they're actually proving that it's like a we will say like a diesel engine. It's kind of slow in the start, but actually now it's proven to be effective. At this point, I'm very, very optimistic that most of the territory that it was taken, it will be recovered again, and also this Kirkuk spot, which actually is very, very important for Maliki and for the unity of Iraq.
Yes, you mentioned there the military advances for the Iraqi government, but will this allow them to confront Barzani's claims to Kirkuk?
Well, definitely, yes. Barzani took actually advantage of a situation where it was like in a sort of land of no one, and they had the Peshmerga, which actually is quite a very strong militia, taking advantage of that situation. The ISIL leaving, and the Iraqi army not actually in the area, so they happen to be very close by. They are quite ferocious militia, the Peshmerga, and they took over. They just took over, and as the President Masoud Barzani is claiming now authority over it, according to a certain article, constitutional article, actually has no meanings, no legal meanings. I just really hope that Maliki puts straight things with Masoud Barzani and clears up the situation, not just with this oil big producing spot, which is Kirkuk, but also with this probable partition of Kurdistan and becoming a future independent state.
Yes, and how much will the current crisis affect Prime Minister Nouri Malki's chances of securing a third term?
Well, he cannot let go of Kurdistan. That definitely is one of the priorities at this point. However, these forces are very, very much distracted, obviously, fighting ISIL and these Takfiri radical groups. So in the background, obviously, Mashoud Barzani is taking advantage of this situation. No? But as I said, Maliki is proving to have a quite strong leadership at this point in Iraq, and not just politically, but we can see also a very, very strong army. Finally, it's moving, finally, it's recovering space. It was actually taking most of this territory by surprise, and that's actually what made very, very easy for this the Takfiri groups actually to enter these cities and cover so much of the space. But as we can see, even Fallujah, which is one of the strongholds of the ISIL, is being very much sieged at this point, with I've heard today around 29, almost 30 militants killed. Even one of the big commanders of the ISIL in the region is also being killed. So I can see that in a very, very soon. I actually thought it was going to take much longer, but the way that I see it is that in a few weeks, most of the territory is going to be recovered, and then from that point on, he will have to sit down with Barzani and find out a solution to this situation with Kirkuk.
All right, political analyst Alberto G. Watson, thank you for sharing your thoughts on this.
Thank you.
Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei has refuted claims that what is happening in Iraq is a Sunni-Shia conflict, stressing that it is a war between terrorists and their opponents. Our correspondent in Tehran has more details.
While addressing the families of those who fell victim to terrorism, the leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, said that the enemies of the Islamic nation are working to create a regional civil war.
The enemy is investing in civil wars in the region and pins hope on a Shia-Sunni war to get rid of the Islamic awakening. What is happening in Iraq is not a Shia-Sunni war. It is a war of terrorism against the opponents of terrorism, and a war between pro-Westerners and the advocates of a nation's independence.
The leader made the comments while meeting with the families of those killed in a terrorist attack on the Iranian capital on June 28, 1981. The bombing, known as Haftatir, claimed the life of the chief of Iran's judiciary at the time, Ayatollah Sayyid Mohammad Beheshti, along with 72 senior Iranian officials.
We shall never forget the martyrs of the historic and unforgettable day. The Iranian nation has always been a victim of terrorism backed by arrogant powers to this day. Those killed 33 years ago are martyrs who had big dreams for Iran.
The Iranian government has always held the terrorist group MKO, backed by the US and the Israelis, for the bombing. The memory of that day remains engraved in the Iranian nation, along with many other attacks which killed tens of thousands of people following the revolution of 1979 and the birth of the Islamic Republic. On the anniversary of the biggest terrorist attack to ever target the Islamic Republic of Iran 33 years ago, the leader of the Islamic Revolution has shed more light on terrorism rocking the region and the world. The leader of the Islamic Revolution believes that terrorism has one goal, and that is the destruction of the region and its religion. But he also has a solution for this, and that is unity. He believes that if the people of the region unite against it, they can defeat terrorism. Reporting for AEE TV, Hussein Dabash, Tehran.
Meanwhile, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said that Moscow will not remain passive while extremists attempt to spread terrorism across the Middle East. The Russian diplomat warned that the ongoing offensive by the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria threatens the foundation of the Iraqi state. Ryabkov, who made these remarks in Damascus after meeting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, also reiterated that the crisis in both Syria and Iraq must be resolved through national dialogue.
This is an alarming phenomenon. It requires united effort, and it requires thoroughly a thought-through political line, an all-inclusive approach. Our understanding is that the United States and their allies in Europe will abide by those basic principles when formulating their political line to what is happening both in Iraq and in Syria.
Those who differentiate between moderate and non-moderate terrorism are mistaken, and that shows that they are allied with this terrorism, which will destroy the region and the world if US and European policies don't change.
Well, a fresh round of militant infighting in Syria has re-erupted. In the latest violence, 2 suicide bombers blew themselves up in a bustling market in the Damascus suburb of Douma, sparking fears of further clashes caused by territorial disputes and ideological differences.
This is the suburb of Douma in Damascus's eastern Ghouta region, where an ongoing war within a war between the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria and the so-called Army of Islam has been raging for months. Dozens of people were wounded when a car bomb exploded in the Syrian town of Douma, northeast of the capital Damascus. This video footage purports to show the aftermath of the deadly blast. Many experts argue that ISIS orchestrated the attack, following its declaration of war against the so-called Army of Islam, another militant group active in the eastern Ghouta area. The dispute between the rival groups, who agree on little else other than their fight to overthrow the Syrian government, has resulted in thousands of casualties, which include bombings as well as targeted assassinations. Earlier, a dissident judge from ISIS, Anas Quwider, known as Abu Hammam al-Shami, was killed, his eyes gouged out, his mother shot dead, with the Army of Islam accusing ISIS of the gruesome killing. In retaliation, the Army of Islam killed one of ISIS's prominent figures, Abdul Majid al-Utaybi, under mysterious circumstances in the region of Hosh al-Ashari, also in Douma. For now, the Damascus suburbs are fast becoming a new battleground between rival militant groups, in which the majority of victims are usually unsuspecting civilians.
Political analyst Ridwan Rizit joins us now from our Beirut studios. Mr. Rizit, what has the advance of ISIS in Iraq meant for the war in Syria? Has it meant the strengthening of the opposition?
Well, for sure they do consider this as a major victory for them, and especially that they gave them upper hand on controlling the land's northern east part of Syria, which has now allowed them to establish, they think that they can establish a very strong state stretch over 200,000 square kilometers with heavy populations, and we can say that also some oil dams points, which can allow them to export some oil in order to finance their war. So I think this is the situation that will give the fundamentalist group in Syria some breathe and hopes. But I don't think this is a practical, and this is also just nothing but a mirage, because that will not allow them to regain or capture any more territories from which they have lost in front of the Syrian army. And also I believe so that the Iraqi army will be able to form itself strongly, because we are, the volunteers now are being trained, and I think that the situation is going to be under control in a couple of weeks' time. So under the attack of the Iraqi army, I think that the ISIS will be crushed between the Iraqi and the Syrian army, and I believe that both armies are going to be to meet over on the borders, and then I believe also that the Kurds will be in a very critical situation, because this is the move that was taken by Masoud Barzani is a very primitive way, because it's too early for the Kurds to establish their own states, and I don't think there is any agreement or regional or international agreement that to allow the Kurds to establish their own states, neither for the Turks, which is or the Iranian or the Syrians. But this is the plan of the Saudis and the Israelis, with the coordination of the Americans, to weaken the area, to partition the area, and then that will be led and mastered by the Israelis. So this is the beginning of a long war, I believe so.
Yes, and does the infighting between rival militant groups in Syria represent divisions between regional states?
Well, I think that between the groups or the fundamentalist groups, we are going to see lots of fightings, because now it's a land, and it's a very rich land, and I think that those groups are fighting over who is going to benefit or to steal just to steal what they call that's the rich money coming from these lands, the taxes, oils, even customs charges. So I believe that those groups are going to fight for the next couple of months with each other, and also that the Saudis will back up the hardliners of them, because that they would like to see more bloodshed taking place in Iraq and Syria. And on the contrary, that I believe that Saudis are deeply involved in that, and they are happy to see this much of killing in what they call Bilad Sham, and so they can weaken both armies. The Syrian army has been fighting for 3-4 years now. The Iraqi army, the new one, still a very young army. It's not well prepared for such a war. But I think that will keep the Iraqi busy with their internal war also, but fighting the same enemies as the Syrians. But this is only can give lots of peace and protection for the Israelis, which are also deeply involved as the Saudis in this, and we must not deny that the deep involvement of the Israelis in the step or the actions was taken by Masoud Barzani, calling for to create or to establish a Kurdish state. So the Israelis now are very happy with what's going on, but I believe that the Iraqi or the Syrians must take a very strong and speed actions to end this war, or otherwise they will face a very strong state over a very large piece of land stretched over both countries in Syria and Iraq, and that this state will be, if it's established or they take a chance to be established, it will be backed up by the Saudis and the Israelis. Then the Syrians and the Iraqis will have a very long war to fight, and I don't think it's going to be for their own benefit.
All right, political analyst Redwan Rizit, thank you for speaking to Ali Tija.
Thank you.
Despite an extension of a ceasefire between Ukraine's warring sides, fresh clashes erupted between troops loyal to Kiev and pro-Russian separatists in the eastern region of Donetsk, resulting in several casualties.
Burned out tanks and fallen trees are all traces of fierce battles which have plagued eastern Ukraine for weeks. There is very little in Slavyansk which suggests that a truce was being observed. Near the flashpoint city, 3 Ukrainian soldiers were killed after pro-Russian separatists attacked an army post. Meanwhile, reports have emerged that the Ukrainian army regained control of a checkpoint in the eastern Donetsk region after deadly battles that left 4 Ukrainian soldiers dead and 5 others wounded. Despite the violence, Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko decided to extend a fragile ceasefire for 3 additional days. The move was agreed to by several rebel factions in the east.
The president said he hoped progress will be made on his peace plan, even though his office stressed that the one-sided scheme reserves the right for Kiev to resume operations against pro-Russian rebels whenever it sees fit. Across the border, Moscow has said that Ukrainian troops have fired 3 shells into the Russian territory, causing damage but no casualties. The Russians lamented the existence of some radical elements that control the flow of weapons being used against civilians. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, for his part, also accused Washington of working to push the Ukrainian leadership towards a military confrontation.
There are radicals who remain under the control of or actively interact with armed ultra-nationalists like Right Sector and battalions, as well as other quite serious groups which do not report to Central Command, the Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine. There are also partners from overseas, our American colleagues, who, judging by numerous evidence, still prefer to push Ukrainian leadership to a confrontational path.
The conflict in eastern Ukraine has also produced a bleak humanitarian picture. The UN in its latest report revealed that over 50,000 people have been internally displaced as a result of flaring battles. The number of those who were forced to flee to neighboring Russia exceeds 100,000, a clear sign that the deteriorating situation in the ex-Soviet state is a long way from being resolved.
You're watching AEE TV World News, still to come. The Venezuelan president promises an investigation into a massive power outage which affected large swaths of the country. Welcome back to AEE TV World News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. The Iraqi army launches a massive military offensive against ISIS militants in a bid to recapture the strategic city of Tikrit. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei warns of foreign plots aimed at provoking civil strife among Muslims. Renewed clashes in eastern Ukraine result in a number of deaths following the extension of a ceasefire between Kiev and pro-Russian separatists. And Muslims worldwide usher in the holiest month in the Islamic calendar, marking the beginning of Ramadan. It's that time of year again where millions of Muslims across the world exercise fasting during the holy month of Ramadan. We take a look now at the significance of this sacred time, which goes far beyond the abstinence of eating and drinking from dawn till dusk.
The firing of a cannon at a sundown to announce the end of the day's fast is one of the best known traditions during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Ramadan is the name of the 9th month of the Islamic lunar calendar. It is the month in which the Quran was first revealed by God to the Prophet Muhammad. During Ramadan, Muslims are required to fast, meaning that they don't drink or eat from dawn until dusk. Fasting allows Muslims to reflect upon many elements of their lives and the lives of others. Hence, Ramadan is seen as a time to reflect over one's relationship with God and remember the blessings which have been bestowed upon them. Ramadan is also a time to be thankful for those things people often take for granted. After fasting for most of the day, Muslims are able to realize just how satisfying food and drinks are. During Ramadan, Muslim families, friends and relatives gather at dusk to break the daily fast and share a meal known as iftar, while small banquets are held during the holy month. Iftars are often held in public places, such as mosques, where larger groups of people are able to gather under the same roof. Following in the actions of the Prophet Muhammad, most Muslims across the world begin their meal by eating a date. Before Ramadan begins, Muslims in different countries across the world start preparing for the month by purchasing kitchen belongings, various herbs, vegetables, fruits, sweets, and drinks that are needed to prepare the iftar after fasting for the entire day. Although high prices are common in shops for traditional foods served during Ramadan, many people still feel obliged to buy such items for the iftar.
Yes, the food is expensive, but we are obliged to buy it. We want it. We need it.
If the food is expensive, we still buy it. What can we do? We should buy it to satisfy the family.
Ramadan is also known for its unique sweets, which are served during the holy month. During the day, shops start preparing for the famous sweets wanted by Muslims during Ramadan.
We have special sweets that we make only in Ramadan. For instance, nood al-sit and killaj. We have our own customers who ask for it.
Various types of decorations are required to make Ramadan complete, including decorated banners in the streets, colorful lanterns, and vibrant catchy lights which illuminate streets, houses, and shops. Practicing the holy month Ramadan is obligatory for all Muslims, poor and rich. Therefore, many charities across the world support people who do not have the means to celebrate during the holy month on their own.
We are planning to distribute Ramadan packages. That will include things like flour and sugar and dates and juice as part of our Ramadan package.
At the end of the day, people often stay up late into the night and go to cafes, or take advantage of the cool nights to take a walk outside. In the early morning, the tabbal begins his work. This title is given to a man who volunteers during Ramadan to play drums and awake Muslims to ensure they can eat before the sun rises. Generally, a family will wake up together to eat in order to handle fasting throughout the day without being overcome by hunger or thirst. Ramadan brings out an extraordinary sense of emotional enthusiasm and religious eagerness among Muslims of all ages. Those who fast are grateful to double their rewards from God by praying. Giving charity, and asking for pardons for their past sins.
political oppression in Qatar has given birth to the first ever Qatari opposition movement based in the Egyptian capital, Cairo. Karim Azzuddin has more for us in the following report.
The spokesperson for the Qatari branch of the Tamarrud movement, Khalid Al-Hil, held a press conference in the Egyptian capital, Cairo, announcing the formation of the first Qatari opposition group. Al-Hil also claimed that his organization had solid proof of widespread government corruption in Qatar.
Today was the announcement of a new opposition entity. We don't expect the government to pledge its support, but the public opinion supports them, and that's all that matters.
The Qatari royal family is spreading chaos in the Arab countries, and this movement is an indication that this area is about to end, and we have to support them.
Al-Hil said that the formation of the opposition group is the result of the ongoing political oppression in the Persian Gulf state. The spokesperson for Egypt's Tamarrud movement stated that Egyptians stand in solidarity with the newly formed Qatari opposition.
Egypt's Tamarrud movement will provide the Qatari movement with all the support it needs, whether political or otherwise.
And while the Qatari opposition group faces an uphill battle in posing a challenge to the rich monarchy in Doha, its formation may signal a step in the direction towards a more inclusive and representative system of governance in the authoritarian states. Once again, Egypt sends a clear message to the world that it stands on the side of the unity of the Arab world by supporting those on a quest for freedom and justice. But will this newly formed opposition entity help tighten the gap between Qatar and its neighboring countries? A question yet to be answered. Reporting for Litiga TV from Cairo, Karim Azzuddin.
2 bombs exploded at a small telephone exchange on Cairo's outskirts, killing 2 people. According to security and judicial sources, the bombs were stored in a building under construction and were intended for use elsewhere. Those clashes have broken out between Houthi fighters and Islamist militants near the Yemeni capital Sana'a. Witnesses also said that in Amran province, battles between government troops and Houthi fighters raged late on Friday, just hours after the 2 sides agreed to a ceasefire. Meanwhile, President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi warned that authorities will not tolerate any violence. Israeli warplanes have launched a series of airstrikes on southern and central areas of the Gaza Strip, killing at least 2 people and wounding scores of others. One of the attacks targeted a police station in the center of the coastal enclave, while a dozen rockets hit a farmland east of Khan Yunis. This as Israeli occupation forces also raided different parts of the West Bank, detaining 18 Palestinians. Anti-government protesters held a demonstration in the southern Jordanian town of Tafila, calling for greater political freedoms and the ouster of King Abdullah. Protesters also expressed their dissatisfaction over high fuel prices and rising unemployment, blaming the government for its inability to revive the country's stagnant economy. Pakistani jets killed 17 militants in the latest raid against Taliban hideouts in the country's restive northeast. The planes bombarded hideouts in North Waziristan region as aid agencies geared up relief efforts for refugees fleeing the military operation. Nearly 500,000 people have fled the offensive, which is aimed at wiping out long-standing militant strongholds in the area bordering Afghanistan. In the latest challenge to the Caracas government, power outages have struck vast swaths of Venezuela. For his part, President Nicolas Maduro has promised to investigate the cause of the massive outage.
A blackout cut electricity in various parts of Venezuela for at least 2 hours and twice interrupted the live television broadcast of a speech by President Nicolas Maduro, who said authorities were seeking more information about the outage. Many residents were left stranded in sprawling Caracas as the power outage affected taxi and public transport services.
Here we are, amid the chaos. When the light goes or something happens here, there are never buses, there are never officers, there's nothing.
The OPEC nation has suffered an increasing number of power outages in recent years, which critics have attributed to low electricity tariffs and limited state investment following the 2007 nationalization of the power sector.
This is a total disaster. We don't know what is the situation we're going through, and there is no reason given for the electricity problem.
Meeting with government ministers on Friday, Maduro vowed to get to the bottom of the problem.
We will investigate the problem with the electricity service in parts of the country. We'll investigate what is happening.
The country has the world's largest crude oil reserves and big rivers that feed hydroelectric facilities, generating 2/3 of its power.
Commemorative events are marking exactly 100 years since the assassination of the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo, a moment that would precipitate World War I. Here is a look back now at what happened in the summer of 1914.
It was the events that unfolded here 100 years ago that were to trigger the devastation of the First World War. On the morning of the 28th of June 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife Sophie left this hotel in Sarajevo to visit the city's mayor. As their convoy drove along the Maljaca River, it was met by crowds of onlookers and a gang of armed men.
At the moment when Ferdinand's car drew level with this bridge at the end, one of the attackers threw a grenade. It missed Ferdinand's car and exploded next to the car carrying officers from the Austro-Hungarian army who were behind.
In spite of this failed attempt on his life, Ferdinand continued to the city hall for his meeting. But when he left, his luck changed. The convoy took a wrong turn and was forced to turn back, leaving Ferdinand face to face with 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip. He pulled a gun and shot Ferdinand in the neck. Then, in the subsequent tussle, Sophie was shot. Both died.
Circumstances meant that the car was literally 1.5 meters in front of him, so he was able to carry out the attack easily, given the proximity.
A century on, and debate about Princip and his accomplices endures. For some, he was a terrorist. For others, a proud patriot who dreamt of the creation of a Slavic nation-state, free from the trappings of religious or ethnic origin.
Their objective was the liberation of all the lands inhabited by southern Slavs, which at the time were occupied by Austria-Hungary, and the creation of the state for all southern Slavic peoples.
The assassination of Ferdinand and his wife would set the great powers of Europe against each other. By August 1914, Austria-Hungary, Serbia, Russia, Germany, France and Great Britain were at war. International commemorations will be held in the Bosnian capital to mark the centenary at the end of June. But Serbia is refusing to join in, as are the Serbs in Bosnia, who see Princip as one of their own and a hero, unlike the majority Muslim population of Sarajevo, for whom Princip is a reminder of their Serbian enemy during the bloody conflict of the 1990s. For many, those shots fired 100 years ago still ring out across the region.
Right, here's a reminder of our top stories. The Iraqi army launches a massive military offensive against ISIS militants in a bid to recapture the strategic city of Tikrit. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei warns of foreign plots aimed at provoking civil strife among Muslims. Renewed clashes in eastern Ukraine result in a number of deaths following the extension of a ceasefire between Kiev and pro-Russian separatists. And Muslims worldwide usher in the holiest month in the Islamic calendar, marking the beginning of Ramadan. Well, that's all from me and the Al Ittijah News team. Thank you very much for watching and good night.